This patient's face literally caught fire during a procedure. This was always my worst nightmare when I worked in the hospital and was doing clinical procedures, or back in the day when I used to have to go to certain patients' house and do procedures and they were on oxygen, yet I had to use alcohol, whether you're changing an IV out or whatever. And I was always so worried about that, because they would always tell us that in school, like be really careful with oxygen around, using rubbing alcohol because these things are very flammable. And this is worst case scenario that could happen. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Dr. Andrea O'Connor, where we like to talk about really interesting medical things. And, I was researching some of the fires that were going on in California, and I came across this medical story because I do get a constant medical feed with all the magazines I'm subscribed to. And this patient's face caught on fire during a surgical procedure. So what happened was this man is in his 50s. He went in, I believe he did have cancer. He went in to have a tracheostomy, and he was awake and alert, and they were getting ready to do a procedure. They had used isopropyl alcohol to disinfect the area. Now, they said it was his face, but like if he was having a tracheostomy, it makes sense to me for them to clean the neck. But why there was alcohol in his face, I'm not really sure. Maybe they were just swabbing the entire area. Maybe they were doing something else. It wasn't really specific in the article I read. But nevertheless, they didn't let the alcohol completely dry on the face before they started using an electrical surgical tool. There was a spark. It ignited. His face and neck caught on fire, and he was awake. So more information came out about what happened to this patient, and his wife is involved in a lawsuit now against the hospital, reasonably so. And when I was reading the details of the case, it's something we all worry about in medicine. And I'm not saying it was anyone's fault, really. This sounds like a terrible accident. However, we have been trained to, like, when you're using things that are flammable, extra precaution. Like if you're using rubbing alcohol, you have to wait till it completely dries. And I still, because I use rubbing alcohol, it's great. It disinfects. And I mean, it's just a good tip for you all that are using rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, to disinfect anything on your skin or around the home or whatever. You don't want to be using electrical tools and equipment and flame near that. So he suffered terrible burns. I think he was, let me go back to the article here. I think he was already, here it says, he was awake and conscious when a spark from a surgical tool ignited his skin right during surgery. Unfortunately, the surgical tool had a history of sparking. And of course, the fire was fueled by the use of oxygen, right? Like I said before, oxygen is extremely flammable. And unevaporated isopropyl alcohol. You swabbed and they just didn't give enough time for that to dry. However, I have to say, so if they're going to blame a surgical tech or a nurse, I have to say, if you have open oxygen in an area, yet you have a surgical tool that is prone to spark, I mean, that itself is a disaster waiting to happen. So I think that was the perfect storm, that then you had the isopropyl alcohol that was not dry involved as well before the tool was turned on and used. So that's the basics of that. So they did confirm that, yes, the patient was undergoing a tracheostomy. It's where they put a hole in the throat. So whatever's going on, like say if you have cancer or something's going on in the throat or the mouth, they can put a trach there so you can breathe. So he also had cancer in his tongue. So obviously in the mouth. So that's probably what was causing the breathing problem. So after this injury with him experiencing his face on fire during surgery, he was able to live 6 more months, but had swelling and wounds and scarring to his face that apparently they said never healed before he died. Obviously, this is a huge lawsuit. This is going to be a huge lawsuit against the staff in the hospital. And you got to feel for this family and how awful. And I'm bringing this up only because, I mean, I guess the awful things going on in California with the fires, and you're like, okay, what can I do to keep my home safe? And I'm in medicine. So those of you in healthcare that are watching, just a reminder about open oxygen and using disinfectants, making sure they're completely dry, right? Because, right, don't we all worry about that? There's so many things we have to worry about in medicine and keeping patients safe, of course. But that, like, we were always told about that, like things are flammable and they can go up. We've all heard the horror stories. And, but even using it, you at home, using these things at home, like if you're, cleaning something like, oh, you have a cut or scrape, you're like, oh, I'm going to just use some rubbing alcohol on it. And then you light up a cigarette, like bad idea. So hopefully this is, something, it's just so tragic. I just had to bring that up, that in this day and age, these horrible accidents can still happen right in the middle of surgery. So I just feel for everyone involved, because obviously this was not intentional. But at the same time, I feel what's happening in society is like, I think a lot of people are either working too fast, or they're stressed out, or they're too checked out. And there's not enough, like, I don't know, I'll say like attention to detail. And maybe because I'm speaking as an older person, because I just practice really carefully, but I notice like I'm so much more careful now, and I take my time more than 20 years ago when I was younger. I would really do things, quickly and fast because I was busy and I had to get a lot done. But I've really become slower and more careful in how I do things. And I don't know, how could this injury be prevented? I don't know. It was terrible. But so if I find out any updates on what's going on with the lawsuit, because, yeah, I think these terrible accidents like this, there's got to be some accountability. And it looks like they did list the physician, the surgeon in the lawsuit, and the surgical staff are listed also as defendants. So, oh my gosh. So you've got everyone that was involved in that surgery now are going to be a part of this lawsuit. Well, I don't know. It's tragic all the way around. But I've heard of things. So back when I was in school, we were taught about, they do call it like a fire triangle, or the three elements you have to worry about. Of course, it's the fuel, the oxygen, and an ignition source. I mean, that they had the triad going right there. They had the surgical tool that was sparking, they had the open oxygen, and then a flammable substance, isopropyl alcohol. So they had the perfect conditions for this fire to start. And this surgical team needed to be vigilant, and something fell through the cracks there. And, we just have to be just so careful. That, could you imagine if that happened to your loved one? I just can't imagine. But, okay, so updates on, because we're in January here, and we have a holiday coming up next weekend, 3-day weekend with MLK Day. And with the California fire, I just keep seeing like that Ventura fire, like there's just new things sparking off. And this is a fascinating podcast. Those of you that are or are not fans of Tucker, it has nothing to do with that, right? He interviews this author, last name Schellenberg. It's what they talk about of the ineptitude of government officials saying this was just going to happen anyway. Kind of sounds like that surgical team, right? That the man's face went on fire. Well, this is a whole city on fire. It's people not paying attention, not doing the basic nuts and bolts of like taking care of people. It's a fascinating interview. If you're curious like me on like how can something like this happen, I thought it was really helpful and informative. Okay, well, hopefully you're all staying safe out there, and I will see you on the next one.